Kendra Williams had exactly 3 rules for her life after college. Never eat gas station sushi, never text an ex after 11 p.m., and never, under any circumstances, go back to Seoul. She had broken Rule 1 twice, Rule 2 4 times, and Rule 3? She was currently sitting in seat 14B on a Korean air flight, 30,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, eating a bag of pretzels and seriously reconsidering every decision she had ever made. It wasn't like she had a choice. Her mother had called at 6 in the morning, which, as any woman with an African-American mother knows, is the universal signal that something has either died or is about to. Kendra Amara Williams, her mother had said, and the use of all 3 names meant Kendra was already in trouble before she'd even opened her eyes. Your Aunt Diane needs you. She's in Seoul. She's sick. And before you say anything, I already bought your ticket. That was it. No negotiation, no discussion. Just a ticket confirmation in her email and the quiet understanding that you do not argue with a Black mother who has already spent the money. So here Kendra was, returning to the city she had left 7 years ago as a bright-eyed 21-year-old exchange student, full of dreams, terrible Korean, and one devastating, humiliating, completely one-sided love story that she had spent the better part of a decade trying to forget. His name was Jung Siwon. She closed her eyes and immediately wished she hadn't, because behind her eyelids, 17-year-old Siwon was leaning against a locker in perfect school uniform dishevelment, smiling at her like sunlight had personally chosen his face as its favorite place to land. She had been 16, he had been a senior, and she had fallen so completely, so catastrophically in love with him that her best friend Zoe had staged a formal intervention involving a poster board and 3 different colored markers. Kendra, Zoe had said, pointing at the poster board, which read, Siwon does not know you exist, in red marker. You need help. He smiled at me in the hallway, Kendra had said dreamily. He smiles at everyone. He smiled at Mr. Patterson's toupee. Kendra had not listened. She had spent 2 years loving Jung Siwon from a careful, devoted, entirely invisible distance. She had learned basic Korean because of him. She had memorized his schedule, not in a creepy way, just in a very informed way. She had written his name in the back of her notebook approximately 412 times, which she knew because she had counted, which was perhaps the most embarrassing fact about herself that she would take to her grave. And then he had graduated, and she had graduated, and the universe had moved on with the casual indifference it reserves for teenage heartbreak, and Kendra had told herself it was fine. She was fine. She had gone to college, gotten a degree in international business, built a decent life in Atlanta, and she was absolutely, completely, 100% over Jung Siwon. The plane hit a patch of turbulence. Kendra gripped her armrest and whispered, "This is a sign." The man next to her looked up from his newspaper. "Sorry," she said, talking to myself. He nodded slowly and moved his newspaper slightly further in her direction as a barrier. She didn't blame him. Seoul welcomed her the way it always had, loudly, beautifully, and with absolutely no regard for jet lag. She stepped out of Incheon Airport into air that smelled like street food and cold spring wind, and something in her chest did a complicated thing that she refused to examine. The city was gorgeous. It had always been gorgeous. That was the problem. Aunt Diane was staying in a rented apartment in Mapo-gu, and when Kendra arrived, dragging her suitcase up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was resting, according to the landlord, she found her aunt sitting upright in bed, eating ramyun, and watching a drama with the volume at a level that suggested hearing loss was imminent. "Aunt Diane," Kendra said, standing in the doorway breathing hard, "you called Mama and said you were sick." Her aunt looked up. She was 62 years old, sharp-eyed, and completely unbothered. "I am sick. I'm sick of eating alone. Sit down, baby. This drama is getting good." Kendra stood very still for a long moment. "You flew me from Atlanta to Seoul because you were lonely." "I flew you from Atlanta to Seoul because your mama loves you and would do anything I ask." Aunt Diane patted the space beside her on the bed. "Come watch. This man is about to confess, and I need a witness." Kendra sat down, not because she agreed with any of this, but because the man on the television was indeed very handsome, and also she was too tired to stand anymore. She stayed. She told herself it was just for a week. She would check on Aunt Diane, make sure the woman was genuinely surviving, and then return to Atlanta and her extremely stable life and her apartment with the good water pressure. 1 week. 7 days. Simple. By day 3, she had a favorite Pojangmatcha 2 streets over, a working knowledge of which subway line smelled the least, and a dangerous addiction to a fish cake stall run by a grandmother named Ajeoshi, who called Kendra "my beautiful foreign granddaughter," and gave her extra portions, which Kendra accepted without argument because free food transcends cultural barriers. On day 4, she went to the Han River with Aunt Diane, who had made a full miraculous recovery the moment there was something fun to do. And they sat on the bank eating convenience store kimbap and watching the city exist in that particular evening light that made everything look like a drama opening sequence. "I love this city," Aunt Diane said. Said Kendra, because she also loved it and was annoyed about it. "You know who's from here?" "Don't." "That boy you used to like, the pretty one, young Aunt Diane. I'm just saying." "You are never just saying anything. You are always saying the exact thing you planned to say from the beginning." Her aunt smiled into her kimbap. Kendra pulled her jacket tighter and looked at the river and thought about nothing. Specifically, nothing. She was exceptionally good at thinking about nothing. The incident happened on day 5. She was in Hongdae because Aunt Diane had sent her on an errand that turned out to be entirely fictional, and she had decided to make the most of it by exploring, which mostly meant walking into a bookstore that smelled amazing and spending 40 minutes she didn't have looking at books she couldn't entirely read. She was standing on the pavement outside, reorganizing her bag, when a very large, very black SUV rolled to a stop directly in front of her. She didn't think anything of it. Seoul had a lot of large black SUVs. It was a prosperous city. Then 3 men in dark suits got out, and they were the kind of men whose general physical presentation suggested that their job description included words like security and consequences. And Kendra took a small, sensible step back, because whatever was happening was clearly not for her. The door of the SUV opened, and Jung Siwon stepped out. The first thing she noticed was that he was taller. That was unfair. He had been tall enough at 18. He had no business adding additional height to himself and just walking around Seoul deploying it on unsuspecting people. The second thing she noticed was that he was in a suit that cost more money than her rent, dark and fitted, and cut with the kind of precision that communicated very clearly that whoever was wearing it made serious decisions about serious things. The third thing she noticed was that he was looking directly at her. He stopped. She stopped. The entire street did not stop. Seoul doesn't stop for personal crises. But in Kendra's personal experience of the moment, everything went extremely quiet. 7 years. 7 years of convincing herself she was over it, and her heart was in her throat before she'd even fully processed that it was him. She did the only reasonable thing available to her. She turned around and walked very quickly in the other direction. She had made it approximately 11 steps when she heard, in a voice that had deepened considerably since she'd last heard it, "Kendra." She stopped walking. He knew her name. He had known her name. This entire time, 17-year-old Kendra had been building her invisible monument to a boy who'd apparently known she existed. She was going to need a moment. She turned around slowly. Jung Siwon was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read, which was new, because the boy she remembered had worn his feelings openly, laughed easily, smiled at everyone including, as Zoe had correctly noted, inanimate objects. This man's face was carefully arranged, composed. The smile that came was small and controlled, and didn't quite reach his eyes the way it used to. "I thought that was you," he said. "Hi," she said, which was the best she had on short notice. "What are you doing in Seoul?" "Visiting my aunt." A pause. "What are you doing in Hongdae with 3 men who look like they could flip this car with their hands?" Something moved through his expression. "Business." "Right," she said. "Business." He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, and she looked back, and the street kept moving around them, and Kendra had the distinct sensation of standing in 2 places at once, on this pavement in Seoul, and in a high school hallway 7 years ago, 16 years old, heart in her hands. "Do you have time for coffee?" he asked. Every sensible part of her brain said no. Said she had an aunt to get back to, and a life in Atlanta, and a very good reason not to sit across from Jung Siwon in a cafe and pretend she was a normal person who had never written his name 400 times in a notebook. "Sure," she said. The cafe he chose was small and quiet, tucked off the main street, the kind of place where the lighting was soft and the coffee was taken seriously. The 3 large men sat at a separate table near the door, which Kendra found both reassuring and deeply concerning, and she decided she would address that after she had consumed enough caffeine to handle the answer. "You look well," Siwon said, once they were seated and the coffee had appeared. "You look like a person who has people," she said, nodding toward the security detail. A pause. "I run a company." "What kind of company?" "Several kinds." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Outside, Seoul moved past the window, indifferent and beautiful. "Siwon. Why do you have bodyguards?" He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that felt like an assessment, like he was measuring something. Then, quietly, "The kind of business I'm in attracts certain kinds of attention." She had grown up watching enough dramas with Aunt Diane to understand what that meant. She had also grown up with enough common sense to know that understanding what something means and being prepared for what something means are 2 completely different things. "Okay," she said slowly. "Okay? I mean, I have follow-up questions, many follow-up questions, but okay for now." And that was how it started. She should have stood up, finished her coffee, said it was lovely to see him, and left. That was the script her sensible brain had prepared. But Siwon, as it turned out, was still the same person who had made her laugh at 17, underneath whatever he had built on top of it. And they talked for 2 hours. And somewhere in the second hour, she forgot to be nervous. And by the time she looked up, the sun had shifted and her coffee was long gone. "I'll have someone drive you back," he said. "I can take the subway." "I know you can." He said it simply, not as a challenge, just as a fact that didn't change his offer. She wanted to argue. She looked at his face and decided to save the argument for something more important. "Fine, but I'm not letting one of the large men hold my bag. That's a boundary." The corner of his mouth moved. It was almost a smile. "I'll let them know." Over the following days, she told herself each encounter was the last one. She told herself this on Tuesday when he texted, asking if she'd found the Han River Festival. And she told herself this on Wednesday, when she somehow ended up at a restaurant where every dish was exquisite and the menu didn't have prices, which Kendra knew from extensive drama watching meant it was the kind of place where the price was, if you have to ask. She told herself this on Thursday, when he drove her to a night market at Namdaemun, and they walked between the stalls in the blue dark evening, and he bought her tteokbokki without asking if she wanted it, because apparently he'd remembered from high school that it was her favorite, which she needed a minute to process. "You remembered that? You used to get it every Friday from the stall near the school gate." "That was 7 years ago." He looked straight ahead. "I have a good memory." She ate the tteokbokki and tried not to make it mean anything. She failed spectacularly. But she wasn't naive. She watched the way rooms changed when he entered them. She noticed how his phone never fully left his hand, how conversations sometimes stopped mid-sentence when certain people appeared, how the 3 men, she had learned their names were Do-hyun, Sang-woo, and Min-jae, were never more than 30 feet away. She noticed the way Siwon sometimes looked out at the city like he was calculating something she couldn't see. The confirmation came on a Thursday. She had been in the apartment with Aunt Diane, who had by now made friends with the landlord's wife, and a woman named Mrs. Yoon from the second floor, who brought over barley tea and Korean language gossip that Aunt Diane absorbed through what appeared to be pure spiritual osmosis. When she looked up Jung Siwon's name online, she sat for a very long time reading. Jung Siwon was 28 years old, heir to a business empire built by his grandfather and restructured by his father, legitimate on paper, and connected in ways that the internet described with careful, specific vagueness. He was referred to in certain circles as Bujang, the boss, and several articles referenced incidents and resolutions and interests, with the particular careful language that meant the writer knew exactly what was happening and had decided they valued their health too much to say it directly. He wasn't just a boy who had become a man. He was a man who had become something significantly more complicated. She closed her laptop. Aunt Diane, who had been pretending to watch her drama for the past 10 minutes while actually watching Kendra, said, "What did you find?" "Nothing. Baby." Kendra looked at the ceiling. "He's the head of... Aunt Diane, he's not just a businessman." "I know." "How do you know?" "Mrs. Yoon told me." "Mrs. Yoon from the second floor knows?" "Mrs. Yoon from the second floor knows everything. She also said he's never brought a woman to the night market before, so I think... Aunt Diane, I am asking you, with love, to stop finishing that sentence." Her aunt looked at her with the calm, unblinking patience of a woman who has lived 62 years and finds other people's drama genuinely entertaining. "What are you going to do?" Kendra thought about it. She thought about the tteokbokki and the 2 hours in the cafe, and the way he'd said her name on the street like it wasn't a surprise, like it was something he'd been keeping somewhere. She thought about the bodyguards and the careful face, and the articles with their delicate, terrified language. "I don't know," she said honestly. She met him the next morning because he'd texted asking if she wanted to see Gyeongbokgung Palace, which was the least intimidating, most publicly historical possible thing to suggest. And she said yes, because she was apparently a woman who made her own decisions very poorly. They walked through the palace grounds in the early morning light before the crowds arrived, and it was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. The old stone and the pine trees and the sky coming up blue behind all of it. Siwon walked beside her with his hands in his pockets, and for a while neither of them said anything, and it was the most comfortable silence she had been in for years. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Are you happy?" He turned to look at her. She held his gaze. "I mean, genuinely. Not the business, not all of it. Are you happy?" Something moved behind his eyes. He looked back at the palace grounds, and for a moment she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, quietly, "I don't think I've asked myself that in a long time." She had not expected that. She had expected deflection, or the small, controlled smile, or a change of subject. The honesty of it caught her off guard, and she had to look away before her face did something revealing. "That's a sad answer," she said. "It's an honest one. Those are allowed to be the same thing." She paused. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to not be weird about it." "I'll try." "You were different before. In high school. You laughed more. You were, I don't know, lighter. And I know things happen and people change, and you've built this whole—" She gestured broadly at the general concept of his existence. "Empire, or whatever. But I can still see the person you were. And I think he's still in there. And I think you're exhausted." Silence. "Kendra, I told you not to be weird about it." "I'm not being weird." "You're doing the face." "What face?" "The controlled face, where you arrange your features so no one can read them. You don't have to do that with me." Another silence, longer this time. A bird landed somewhere nearby and flew away again. In the distance, the first tourist group of the day was arriving through the main gate. "Gwen Chun-ha," he said. "I'm fine." The Korean came out flat, automatic, the kind of fine that means the opposite. "Siwon." He looked at her. "Gwen Chun-ji-an-ha," she said softly. "You're not fine." Her Korean was rusty, and she probably mangled the tone, but she said it clearly, and she held his eyes while she said it. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she'd seen him on the street in Hongdae, he smiled. A real one. Small, startled, like it arrived without his permission. "Your Korean has gotten better," he said. "Don't change the subject." "I'm not." He looked at the palace. "I'm really not." She knew then that this was not going to be a one-week situation. She knew the way you know things that are going to complicate your life considerably. She called Zoe that night. "He's a mafia boss," she said without preamble. A long pause, then, "Kendra Amara Williams." "I know. I made a poster board, Zoe. I made a poster board that said, Siwon does not know you exist. He knew I existed. And now you're calling me from Seoul to tell me I'm calling you from Seoul to think out loud. Okay, Zoe said, and her voice shifted into the gear it went into when she was actually listening. Talk. He's not what I expected. I mean, he is, in the sense that he's... Zoe, he remembered the tteokbokki. The what? The rice cakes, from high school. He remembered I liked them. A pause. Oh no. I know. Kendra, you can't fall in love with a mafia boss because he remembered your rice cakes. I am not falling in love. You called me at midnight Seoul time. Kendra was quiet. You called me, Zoe said gently, at midnight Seoul time, which means you cannot sleep, which means... Okay, Kendra said. Okay, let's move on. What are you going to do? I don't know, but I think... She looked out the window at the Seoul skyline, all lit up and sleepless, the way this city always was. I think there's still something good in there, in him, and I think he's been waiting for someone to see it. That's very heroic of you, Zoe said, and also extremely dangerous. I know. And you're going to do it anyway. I didn't say that. Kendra, I'm going back to Atlanta in 2 days. Are you... A long, honest pause. Probably not, Kendra admitted. Zoe made a sound that was half laugh and half despair. I'm updating the poster board. She extended her stay. Aunt Diane celebrated this development with an energy that suggested she had been expecting it. Mrs. Yoon brought over extra barley tea. The landlord's wife made a noise that in any language meant she approved. Kendra did not plan any of what happened next. She would like to be very clear about that. She did not plan to show up at the restaurant where Siwon was in a meeting and find the situation significantly more tense than a business lunch had any right to be. She did not plan to walk in and immediately read the room. The way the men at the far table were positioned, the cold quality of the silence, the subtle displacement of Do-hyun to her left. And she did not plan to do what she did next, which was pull out her phone and say loudly, in the clearest Korean she could manage, "Jagia, I've been waiting outside for 20 minutes. Are you almost done?" It worked. Whatever was happening, it de-escalated. The men at the far table exchanged glances. One of them almost smiled. Siwon turned to look at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, which was the specific look of a man who has been completely blindsided and is genuinely unsure what to do about it. She smiled at him pleasantly. He wrapped up the meeting in 4 minutes. In the car afterward, he looked at her for a long time. "That was dangerous," he said. "You looked like you needed an exit." "You didn't know what that situation was. I knew you needed help." A pause. "Was I wrong?" He looked at her. He looked at her for so long that Do-hyun, who was driving, found somewhere very interesting on the road to focus. "No," Siwon said finally. "You weren't wrong." "Then it was fine." "Kendra." His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. "The world I'm in is not... I know what world you're in." "Then you know that people who are close to me are at risk." "I know." She met his eyes. "I'm still here." "Why?" She thought about 16-year-old herself, Notebook full of a name, heart full of someone who smiled like sunlight. She thought about the real smile that had slipped out at the palace when she'd said he wasn't fine. She thought about tteokbokki and 2 hours of coffee and a man who looked at a city like he was exhausted by it. Because you remembered the rice cakes, she said. A pause. Then Siwon laughed. A real laugh, uncontrolled and surprised, the laugh she remembered from high school, and it was so unexpected that Do-hyun actually looked in the rearview mirror. Sang-woo and Min-jae in the following car probably wondered what had happened. Kendra thought she could listen to that laugh for a considerably long time. "That's your reason?" he said. "It's a good reason. It's the strangest reason anyone has ever given me for anything. I contain multitudes." He shook his head, but the laugh was still there, softer, in the corner of his expression. She counted it as a victory. It wasn't simple after that. It wasn't supposed to be. There were conversations that were hard, evenings where the weight of what he carried made him go somewhere she couldn't follow, phone calls he took that made his face close like a shuttered window. There were moments where she had to remind herself firmly that she was not a character in one of Aunt Diane's dramas, that real people got real consequences, and this was not a situation that resolved itself in 16 episodes. But there was also this. He called her one evening from a rooftop overlooking the Han River, and she could hear the wind in the phone and the distance in his voice, and she said, "Siwona." The was deliberate, informal, the way you address someone close. When did you last do something just because you wanted to? Not because it was necessary, not because of the business, just because you wanted to. A long silence. "I can't remember," he said. "Then I'm going to need you to think about that," she said. "Because the version of you that's forgotten how to want things that are just for you, that's not okay. That's not something I can watch and pretend is fine. Kendra, I'm serious. I'm standing in your city, eating fish cake from a grandmother who has adopted me against my will, and I have very strong feelings about this." A quiet sound, not quite a laugh, but close. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met." "I know," she said. "It's one of my best qualities." Change is not a single moment. Kendra understood that. You couldn't love someone into a different person against their will. She had read enough and lived enough to know that. What you could do was stay present. What you could do was refuse to pretend things were fine when they weren't, refuse to disappear when things got heavy, refuse to stop seeing the person underneath the construction. What you could do was be, consistently and without apology, exactly yourself, and trust that it mattered. She couldn't dismantle what he'd built. She didn't try. What she did was smaller and more persistent than that. She made him laugh on a Tuesday when nothing was funny. She argued with him about whether bibimbap or kimbap was the superior convenience food with the seriousness of a United Nations debate. She met him on a rooftop at 7 a.m. with 2 coffees and sat beside him in silence when the silence was what was needed. She called him on the nights when she could hear something wrong in the pauses and said simply, "I'm here. Talk if you want to. If you don't want to, I'll just tell you about my day." And then she told him about her day, in comprehensive, slightly absurd detail, until she heard him breathing easier. And slowly, the way real things happen without fanfare, without a single dramatic declaration, something began to shift. He started sleeping more. She knew because he told her, and because the shadows under his eyes were lighter. He started delegating more, pulling back from certain operations, making decisions that his second-in-command, Do-hyun, who had, at some point without anyone formally announcing it, become something like an ally to Kendra, described, with great personal relief, as long overdue. He started saying no to things. That, she thought, was perhaps the most significant. A man who has been told his entire life that he is the answer to everything, learning to say no? That was enormous. That was the whole thing. He said it first on a Thursday, 2 months after she had walked past him on a Hongdae pavement and made 11 extremely committed steps in the wrong direction. They were at the Han River, in the evening, in the spot that had become theirs without discussion, watching the city light up its own reflection in the water. His phone had rung, and she had watched him look at it, and then look at the river, and then put it in his pocket. She didn't say anything. "They can wait," he said. She kept looking at the river. "Kendra." "Gomawo." "Thank you." She turned to look at him. His face was open in a way it hadn't been on the Hongdae street. The careful arrangement relaxed. Something underneath it that she recognized from 17 years ago. "For what specifically?" she asked. "I've done several things." "For seeing me," he said quietly, "when I had stopped seeing myself." She looked at him for a moment, this complicated, exhausted, beautiful person who had remembered her favorite food for 7 years and stood in a palace and let a real smile out before he could stop it. Her heart, which had been making its opinion known since Hongdae, arrived at its conclusion. "Jung Siwon," she said. "Kendra Williams. I wrote your name in my notebook 412 times when I was 16. A pause. His eyebrows moved very slightly. "What?" "I counted," she said. "I want to be transparent about that up front." He stared at her. Then he started laughing, and it was the full, real, uncontrolled version, the one that had startled Do-hyun in the car, and she laughed too, because it was objectively funny, and the Han River held their laughter, and the city lights shimmered in the water, and Seoul kept going around them, loud and beautiful and completely indifferent. When the laughing settled, he looked at her, and the expression on his face was something she had never been looked at with before. "Nega johe," he said softly. "I like you." "I know," she said. "I liked you first. I have the notebook as evidence." He reached over and took her hand, which she allowed, and they sat in the specific quiet of two people who have said the thing and now exist together on the other side of it. Aunt Diane, who had known this was coming since approximately day 2, opened a bottle of soda water at home and toasted herself. Mrs. Yoon from the second floor, who somehow knew within the hour, brought over extra barley tea. Zoe, when informed, updated the poster board. It now read, in 3 colors because Zoe was committed to the bit, "He knew she existed the whole time." And Kendra Williams, who had flown to Seoul to check on a perfectly healthy aunt, who had broken Rule 3 with her eyes open, who had walked back to her high school crush through 7 years of distance and 1 very eventful month, thought that some rules are made not to be followed, but to be broken at exactly the right moment, for exactly the right reason. She was still in Seoul at the end of the week, and the week after that. Aunt Diane, for the record, never did go back to Atlanta. Neither, for the record, did Kendra. And if you've made it to the end of Kendra and Siwon's story, congratulations! You just survived an Afro-Korean Mafia romance with your heart mostly intact, which is more than most people can say. If this story lived in you even a little, if you laughed, if you held your breath, If you said, "Oh no," at any point during the tteokbokki scene, then you belong here. Hit that subscribe button because Kendra is not the only one with a story to tell in this world. And the next episode is going to make you forget your own name. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment you knew Siwon was down bad? I need to know. And if you're watching this at midnight telling yourself you'll sleep after one more, good. Stay. We're just getting started.